Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 38th episode of the Startup Boston podcast, where I interview entrepreneurs, investors, and influencers in the Boston startup community to uncover actionable advice and stories from their experiences. I'm your host, Nick Dupuy. First, a big thank you to Fredson Gomes, co-founder at Render Apps, for introducing me to today's guest. Today's guest is Brian Oneill. Brian is a product designer of more than 20 years, with 10 of those being as an independent consultant, and recently started his company designing for analytics. Brian has helped design products for companies ranging from startups to enterprises, including NetApp, TripAdvisor, Infinio, Fidelity, and DataXu. A few things we talk about in this episode are the differences between UI and UX and what the role of the product designer is, how to measure the user experience and go about discovering UX issues, common mistakes he sees people make, and how being a musician has influenced the way he approaches product design. And if you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes so you can get all of the new episodes as soon as they're released right on your podcast app. And as always, you can find today's show notes at startupbostonpodcast.com, and you can reach me at nic@startupbostonpodcast.com. Enjoy today's episode. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you because I'm a firm believer in using data to drive decisions.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to get talking here today.
Cool.
So to get us going, you can give us a little background about yourself?
Yeah, I've been a product designer and user experience professional for about 21 years, something like that. So I started in 96 out in Arizona, and about last 10 years of that, I've been fully independent, just doing consulting work, mostly almost entirely around Boston. So
okay,
yeah.
How did you initially get interested in product design?
Well, it was called web design. It's been called many things over the years. We have a naming problem in our space, which is kind of funny. But first, kind of work I was doing was in the Northern Arizona travel space for travel websites. So GrandCanyon.com and Pink Jeep Tours in Sedona, and it was all kind of tourism area. And then gradually I moved into kind of having clients on the side from the agency I was working at. I was a music major in Flagstaff, and so I ended up doing some work for the School of Performing Arts in the NAU Career Center's office. And so just kind of built up a small portfolio, and then I moved to Boston in 99, and that's kind of when I got into the startup scenes and was working at a startup called Smart Planet, which was a Ziff Davis spinoff. It was in the first online learning space, so you could pay online, like software as a service. You pay online, you could take a course in cooking and all kinds of different things, or a lot of programming classes, stuff like that. Yeah, basically just started there, and I've been several different companies, and eventually went solo in 2006 entirely.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what are some of the companies that you've helped create products for, and what are some of the products they've helped create? Yeah, if you can say.
Oh, yeah. Well, I named, since I've been in Boston, I was at Smart Planet. I did a lot of work at Lycos, specifically in their business and finance area. So Lycos Finance, which used to be part of Quote.com, which was a startup in Mountain View. So they developed software for active traders. So they had actually a fat client called Q Charts, which is for technical trading, options traders, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my first foray, I guess, into kind of data-heavy interface design. And then I kind of stayed in finances for a while. I was at Fidelity for a while, and also went to JP Morgan and was helping redesign a brokerage system there for Brownco, which was a startup, or not a startup, but it was a small active brokerage that JP Morgan had picked up, but it was still running as its own business. So I was a staff designer there, and then I was design director at eons.com for about a year or two, which was a social network for boomers and seniors, started around 2005. And then that was my last full-time gig, and I had been kind of moonlighting on the side, and then I just decided to just try freelancing entirely, mostly so I could focus on my other career. I have a music career as well, and so just the flexibility of doing that sounded appealing, and I was ready to just focus a little bit more time on both of those things. And I've never looked back since then. So I've done a lot of work with startups, Apptopia, Dispatch, Kyruus, Miu Health, DataXu. List goes probably more. That's what I could think of off the top of my head. Corey, we just talked about that before the interview in the storage space. Infinio is also another a company in the storage space down in Kendall Square. So yeah, so it's kind of been a mix of 2 to 5 person shops and like Dell and EMC and massive enterprise products as well. So it's a nice mix.
So what's it like to work with the small startups and then the large enterprises? What are some of the differences with that?
Pace is obviously a lot different. So enterprises move a lot more slowly because it's all of the inherent communication I'm going to call them problems because challenges, I guess we'll call them. It just takes a lot longer to make decisions, and you don't always have the right people around to make decisions to move things forward, or you don't know that you don't have the right people around, and no one else knows either until much later. And so you do a lot of revisiting, a lot of re-education in the design process. Like, I was on a project recently where, the design team has been working with a core group of stakeholders, making a lot of progress, and then they will onboard an engineering group that's more specific to the area that we were working on. So there may have been engineering representation all along, which I believe there should be, but not the people that were going to do the work, who ended up having very technical and domain-specific knowledge that probably would have been valuable earlier, but it just, for whatever reason, they had not been staffed to be involved. And so you end up revisiting a lot of ideas. So just the pace is a lot slower. And the risk levels are higher for getting stuff wrong typically, whereas a startup tends to be much more okay with taking risks on things, and everything's about speed. A lot of the time, quality tends to always come second to speed with a lot of the places I've worked. There's a little bit more dog and pony show sometimes, like that can happen there. So there's two kinds. I like both. I like the atmosphere of generalists that you get with startups. I like people that wear many hats, and you might be doing sales and then fixing bugs and interviewing another candidate, and I like people that wear many different hats, and they're more looking for which problems need to be solved. And it might just be someone spilled coffee on the server and you need to go get a hairdryer down the street. It's like stuff like that where they're looking for problem. They have almost a consulting mindset a little bit. So I kind of like that, and I find there's more drive, more passion. You're not getting paid to show up. You're getting paid for results, and the clock is ticking. And so the incentives are different in the startup world than they are in large companies typically.
So you've been doing the consulting now for about 11 years?
Yeah, 2006. So
okay.
11 years.
And you started designing for analytics last year.
Correct.
So
yeah.
Why did you want to start designing for analytics, and tell us more about it?
Well, it's really to have kind of a specialization in an area that I really enjoy working in, which is the analytics space and technical products. So there's not a lot of design thinking or design being applied in that area, and there's more and more devices, software and hardware, that are collecting analytics. Everything's a data collector now. Everything's a node, and the more and more of the stuff we collect, the more and more there is a need for insights from that. And I think a lot of times the assumption is because we have all this data collected, we now have value. And you don't necessarily have value. You can have data and have noise as well as you can have data and have value. So it's that transition. It's the designing of the data to turn it into information and insights is really where that's what I kind of see the role of design is there. And I find that really interesting. So I really just started that to kind of focus my consulting in one place. Most consultants, we do a lot of our business through referral. And so that's kind of nice because that keeps me fresh in different domains that might be outside of analytics. So I'm not doing the same thing all the time. Mm-hmm. And then the analytics is I can kind of focus my thing there where I may not have as many contacts, or there aren't as many clients that might come through that or whatever, but I'm still interested in it. So that's kind of why I started, and just been doing a lot of content writing and stuff. I have a mailing list for that, and sending out insights on, trying to help founders and product managers learn about how to kind of internally apply design thinking on their own, because design is definitely something that can be taught. At least the capital D part, or it's called design thinking. It's really just design. It's been rebranded. But that thinking can be applied and without necessarily bringing on a interface designer or a user experience person right away. So I want to see people do that,
Can you tell us about what the role of a product designer is?
Product design it got taken from the physical or the industrial product design world, but I really like it even in the technology space, because it implies that we're kind of thinking holistically about shipping the product, and we're not necessarily focused just on the user interface piece. So there may be an offline component to your service, or your whole service may be a service with no interface, but it doesn't mean there's not a role for design to play, which is really to, I kind of tell my clients, I really see it as with every project, there should be, and there probably are, even if they haven't been stated yet, goals that users have and goals that the business or organization has. And the role of design is to try to ensure that those outcomes are realized. And a lot of projects become lost in debate or arguments about which color where should the button go, and should we do it on this way or do it on that way. And a lot of those debates come from the fact that there's not a shared understanding of what success looks like, or we don't agree on which problem we're solving. Like marketing's trying to collect email addresses, and the engineers just want the form to be fully filled out with no errors, and the designer wants no form at all, and the product manager is trying to make money. And so there's this, disagreement on what the overall objectives are for the project. And so you end up kind of arguing about superficial level things. So I really see strong product designer jobs is you need to be able to extract the goals if they have not been stated already. You need to be able to extract the objectives from your stakeholders, which typically are product. In most places now, they're product management and or engineering stakeholders, possibly marketing, and then obviously understand the needs of the users or represent them. Ideally, you've talked or interviewed them, but you understand what it is that they're doing in the real world that needs to translate online, or it may be a new process that doesn't exist. There is no such thing as an offline equivalent, but you've informed your decision making through that. Mm-hmm. And it's really, you're almost like a facilitator, because I think a lot of the design work happens in the room, doing whiteboarding, working with stakeholders. And this, I didn't come up with this. I forgot why I heard this first, but it might have been a Jared Spool thing talking about design. The interface design is really the documentation of all these decisions that have been made with different stakeholders, subject matter experts, product managers, and I really do see it like that. I might spend 80% of a project in a whiteboard room and pencil sketching and doing emails and sketch conversations, and then at the very end, wham, 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 a bunch of UI comes out, and it's like pretty much on the right track, and everyone's nodding their head, and we're not sitting there debating stuff because it's not surprising to anyone. It's like, yes, I see that is what we just talked about. They just didn't have the ability to get from their thinking to that interface. It's the process you go through to get to that, which is the role that, at least in my practice, that's what I'm focused on doing.
So you spend most of your time not actually creating something, but planning on what to create. And
I see it is being created. It's being conceived and not necessarily always in a visual way.
Right.
I mean, there's usually a lot of sketching that, even if it's just a workflow. So you're saying the guy does this before he does this, but then he needs to like send the data to this. No. He doesn't actually send it. He does. Oh, okay. So it's all this kind of stuff, and then eventually, there's that setup wizard that we talked about, but they saw it come through this process. So that's more of a UX piece. The UI piece, if you're talking about just the creation of that, that mostly happens in a silo, and you could say there's less of that. So what I don't do is jump in to just start doing GUI design, because the chances of me satisfying those objectives without knowing what they were, either the user side or the business side, is so low. All I'm doing is wasting my clients' money and time, and so I will generally just refuse to do that because it's not in their interest to do it. And at that point, it's like, well, you might as well just go use a library or have one of your developers just throw the data into some templates and move forward. If speed is the only thing you care about, then it doesn't matter how good you're telling me it doesn't matter. The design is not going to make a difference anyways. And so it's always this kind of balancing act between the two of those. But when it gets visual is also when it gets real for most people and for my clients. And so you kind of have to like play that carefully, because people are always eager to see it, quickly. So, and it doesn't necessarily take a long time. It just, the overall project tends to be shorter and faster, but it takes a while before you get to see the first thing. Instead of, you know what I mean? You're not doing 10 revisions of one thing. You might do 1 or 2, but it took the same amount of time, but you didn't go through all the debate and extensive process of sitting in Sketch and doing pixels and all this kind of stuff, basically wasting time only to find out that you just learned that, I didn't know you meant this, or, oh, I didn't know they had to be logged in, or, oh, so we won't have access to their address when they fill this form out. Oh, so I guess that whole mapping thing I just did is now, like, that's a lot of wasted time. And so every project's different, but that's kind of general how it works, at least for me.
So I think that UX and UI oftentimes get confused. And so can you explain the differences between the user experience and the user interface?
Sure. I would say you can have a user experience that doesn't have a user interface on it. So an experience, this is sometimes called service design now, but if you think about the process of returning a package, like from a store, right? There might be an online portion. Maybe you print out a bill, but then you're going to the post office and then you're tracking it. Maybe you're calling UPS. All of that is part of user experience, and you can design that thing. And design might be simply, oh, I open the box and the return label is already there, as is the packaging, and the bag has a sticky thing on it. So when I open it, like, I like to shop at Gilt sometimes, Gilt. And like their bags, when you open it, if you notice it, there's already a peel off sticker thing in there, and they've included the return label for you. So someone probably designed that experience of making it very easy to process a return. All I basically have to do is hit print, the label comes out, and it's ready to go. So that's user experience to me. And there's only one page of the UI. Log in, go to the order, hit return, print the label. That's the user interface piece. But if you didn't think about that whole process of like returning the package, then you probably wouldn't have gotten the UI right, because someone would have had to decide that, well, what are they putting it in? And is the label a peel off label, or do they have to print the label out? And like, so that's what a user experience designer is or should be thinking about, is kind of that overarching flow. So I think UX takes place over time, whereas a UI is really an asset that sits in front of you and it changes states and all of this, but the experience is the process of moving in and out of the interface, as it would be.
So what's something that you believe designers should start doing when they're working with data-driven design, and what's something that they should stop doing?
There's often a lot more quantitative. Well, it depends on the product. You may have access to quantitative and qualitative research information, and both of those are very valuable. There are a lot of places that do things like A/B testing, which basically is taking action based on quantitative results. You don't know why people are clicking the red button more than the orange button, but red has a 10% higher, conversion rate, and so you change to red. That's quantitative decision making. It's better than not doing any testing at all, because at least you're informing your data. I think qualitative testing is really important and tends to be the thing that a lot of places don't want to invest in, because it's hard to see what the immediate ROI is. But this is a process of doing interviews and do kind of like what we're doing right now to learn about, what's it like ordering a shirt online and it doesn't fit? Tell me about that thing. Well, I hate it. It really sucks. And and I wish I could just take it back. And, sometimes I shop at you shop at this other store? Yeah, I shop at the store called Sack. Well, what if you could return our item at their store? Like, oh, that would be pretty interesting. And so if I had never had that conversation, I would never arrive at the questions that I never knew to ask about. Yeah. And that's one of the best things, and things I tell my clients about all the time, is that part of the reason you do qualitative research is that you don't even know all the questions to ask. It's the best thing when you find out there's these like latent problems or needs that exist that you never were asking about, and you're in the position to actually satisfy those things, sometimes quite easily, but no one ever brought it up before because nothing prompted them to do that. So they kind of serve two different purposes. In some places it's very hard, like in the enterprise world especially, it can be really hard to get direct access to end users because of the walls with sales processes and just not always knowing who the person on the ground is using, like we talked, you've worked at HP before, and so that there's, people that use the storage systems that manage them day to day are not necessarily the buyer. The CIO might have been involved in the purchasing decision or whatever. That could be a massive division. And so the designer is so far away from those people a lot of the time that sometimes you might only have quantitative data to work with, or you rely a lot more on third-party feedback. But the most important thing is that you're responding to any data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that you're utilizing that information in your design decisions.
So what's the difference between persona and the market segment?
my friend Steve Mulder actually wrote a book on this, but like when I was at Lycos in 2001, this was kind of a hot area. I think realistic personas that are actually based on facts through both qualitative and quantitative research are tremendously useful design tools, but I find a lot of places don't really have real personas. They have made up, or what I sometimes call assumptive personas. It's the people they think. And I actually don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, especially for startups, because what they're doing is saying that there are a specific number of people with individual roles that we need to design for, and they don't all need the same thing. So I think while they may not have facts to back up those personas, the fact that they're going through the process of trying to focus on discrete roles that maybe later on can be validated as they mature as an organization and talk to more people, they'll start to say, oh, that's not really, the manager doesn't really ever touch the system, actually. He doesn't grant rights to other users. Actually, the main guy on the floor does all that, so we shouldn't have a role called manager because it's really misleading. It's really the guy that, whatever. Yeah. But the fact that they even thought that there might be a role difference there means that they're kind of on the right track. And so many places just can't afford or don't take the time to go do formal, and you don't really create personas. You really discover them through the process of research, and it's a way of kind of taking 30 interviews and 2,000 survey respondents and putting them into a design tool, a picture of a person that you can actually make design decisions against. And so market segmentation is different because it's focused on demographics and like maybe how much money they spend, and they spend $18 a month on entertainment, and they drive this kind of car, and they're 42 years old. Guess what? None of those things probably are going to help you design anything better. But if you find out like Tom is a generally angry customer that does not like to log into this tool, but he has to use it for his business. And when he logs in, the most common things he does is checks his messages, responds to any action items that are due, X, Y, and Z. He does not like to share with his colleagues what he's doing because he's incentivized to do more on himself. Those are all activities and not really about how much money he makes or demographic information. So that's really kind of what the difference is. But it's so rare to find a company that actually has taken the time to do that. And at least in my experience, I think bigger enterprise companies tend to be the ones that have more time and budget to do this, and it's probably even more important that they do that to quell all the internal debates when you have so many different stakeholders.
Yep.
But that's kind of what the difference is
okay.
One's a design tool, the other one is more about spending possibility, how to position the service, that type of thing, but not about tasks and activities.
I want to talk now a little bit about the process of designing.
Sure.
So you touched on it a little bit earlier, but can you tell me a little bit more about how you go about discovering UX issues?
So there can be low-lying user interface issues, and those can sometimes just be dealt with in an audit. So this is best practice issues, or I personally can relate to, like, maybe it's in the analytics space, so I have a specific lens that I'm looking at it, and I can give a best practice recommendation. The next stage is, when I go through that, is to get my clients to talk to me about what are the goals that you have and what were the tasks and activities this person was trying to do. You tell me what they're supposed to be able to do, and I will then give you my audit of how well the UI might be doing that. Or I will just go study it directly with them. I will take your comments or work with you to extricate these tasks and actually go run a study. And that's the most factual validation you will get of how someone is actually working through it and where the roadblocks are. So I can always guess at stuff, but like I'm very hesitant to just respond to people's design, because most of the stuff I'm going to see is cosmetic or UI level. It might be some workflow things, and I would say my suspicions are after 20 years I have a good idea of where things might be wrong, but you never know when it's like there's a very specific reason why we do not have the credit card form on the same page as the whatever form, and it's because X, Y, and Z, or like, I don't know what the reason is, but you can never just look at it. I'm surprised sometimes how many designers have such strong opinions about the design of certain things when they have maybe no idea what the actual objectives the business had. Maybe this whole form is about collecting email addresses. It's not really about getting a full profile, and it's not even about buying something. This company actually wants to get an email address, and that's the reason why the email is not on the checkout page, is they want to make sure they collected it ahead of time. I don't know. I'm making all this kind of stuff up.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to just eyeball problems beyond surface level interface things. Like this is just generally cluttered. It's not laid out well. It's complicated. You're using verbiage don't call it, a navigator, just you don't need a name for the navigation menu, and it's definitely not navigator. There's no reason to innovate on that. You're not helping anyone. You're just creating more things for people to sit and analyze. Like, what is that? What's the navigator? Oh, it's the menu. Okay. Why did I need to spend 10 seconds on that? And what do you guys do, by the way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can go in and answer these kind of heuristic type things, but it usually involves talking to the client, understanding users' needs, understanding the business in order to get it. Okay, what might be wrong with this thing now?
So if you're conducting user interviews, for example, how do you go about that process without being leading into what it is that you're looking for?
I mean, it depends on the type of research you're talking about, but I would say when I'm doing qualitative research, which if that's happening with my clients, it's usually specifically targeted at being open-ended. And so despite how this podcast may be going, I'm focused on listening and not talking. So right now I'm talking to you a lot, but in that context, I'm very much, all my script is like, right now you have a script prepared for me. My script is there to just make sure the guy doesn't stop talking, because I want 2 hours of great content from that person. And if they go on a tangent, then I go back to my script, maybe going on to the next question. But if they're not really off topic too much, I want them to wander, and I want to hear where things go. And I'm not going to talk during that. There are many, in terms of like usability testing, there's all different ways of not biasing, the test results. And there's you can be trained on this and learn a lot about it. But a lot of it has to do with the way you're asking questions, and they're not leading. Like, how great was that experience? Or, leading people like, did you see the glowing red button up here? And offering that kind of information too soon or in the middle of the test, whereby someone in the 8th question is going to have to click that button, and you ask them in the 7th question if they saw it. Well, now you don't know if they actually saw it, and so you've biased the findings for the 8th one.
Question, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different tricks and that's really more for usability testing. But for interviews, it's just shut my mouth and just try to keep the participant talking as much as possible, and we're looking for those insights that we didn't know to ask about.
Okay. So, do you work with beta users at all?
Yeah, I mean, I don't look at a beta user as necessarily any different than any other type of user at least from a research perspective. I always think of beta as kind of being too late, but it's never a waste of time, because you should be getting feedback all the time. So that beta user eventually is going to become what's called a customer once you go live. And before you launch, they're a research participant, but it's still a person using your service. And you should be getting that feedback constantly. So the reason I say it's too late is at least from a design standpoint, by the time you're in beta with working code or a working product, it's much more expensive to make design changes. And so we always want to try to get any type of research activity happening much earlier in the process, because it's much easier to change it in pixels and even easier to change it in pencil and paper than it is to go do it in code. And that's gone down. The price of that has gone down greatly with better frameworks, and it's much easier to make code changes now, but it's still a lot slower than just changing the design, you know, and not wasting cycles on the wrong architecture or whatever it may be,
Yeah. So I'm interested to know, and what happens when you have, say, on your team, like PMs, developers, designers, and people disagree on what it is you should be designing or what something should look like. What does that process look like for you to come in as a designer and try and convince, say, the PMs or developers to do something differently?
Well, I would say by the time I've been brought into something, it may be for the point of relieving the tension there, or the team realizes, hey, we can't come to agreement on this, but we can all agree that none of us probably know the best answer. And so they're looking at me to tell them what the right answer is there. Okay. And so I would say at this point in my career, I don't have a lot of those kinds of decisions anymore, because that's what people are paying me for, and quite honestly, it's not a valuable use of time for 4 people to sit in there and talk to me about what color the button should be. That's actually a big waste of time. And I don't want my clients worried about that stuff. I want them to be focused on the bigger picture things and the delivery of the product and that type of stuff. So all that said, yes, I've been in that meeting, and it does come. And so one of the things I like to do is I want to isolate whether or not what someone is complaining about is actually the problem. And so that often involves asking a lot more questions, a lot of why questions. And I want to see, is that the only thing that there's? So what you're saying is you like everything in this GUI, this dashboard is great, but you have a real challenge with my choice on this thing. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I just think it should be orange, and why is it different? And every other one is great. So okay, so we need to just isolate this one thing. And so now what we've done is stop debating all the other stuff, and we've kind of honed in on a specific area, and we can kind of move forward at that point. I would say a lot of those decisions also, like if we're talking about cosmetic things, it's more important to make a decision than it is to keep like having a debate about it. And so I will give my best thing, and I will advocate for a decision maker in the room to own the decision and move it forward if I think it's not something of consequence to the business or to the customer, because chances are the color of the button is not going to make a big difference to the customer anyways, unless it's a legibility issue or something like that, which I would have brought up as a functional reason not to color it a certain way. But generally it just doesn't happen, and I try to avoid getting into that kind of situation. But making a decision is more important because you can always go validate it later. So this kind of like big argument about how it should work, there's A/B testing, launch both versions. If it's a website, there's plenty of tools now that can analyze which one actually works better, or go test it. So there's ways to stop those debates and move things along. So
what are some examples of products that you believe to have a good UI and UX?
So I don't do what's called hourly billing. Like when I do my consulting work, I work on projects now, fixed fee projects. But when I was doing hourly billing, there is a tool called Harvest, which I really liked. It's a small startup, and all it is time tracking. But what it does is on your phone or on your desktop, there's just a little H icon, and you just on and off it. And it's also aware of idleness. Like if you're idle, it'll prompt you, like, are you still working?
Okay.
And so instead of doing like a lot of hourly calculations, I just hit the timer and I do my work, and then I can go, if I go to the restroom or whatever, get some tea, bang, just hit the pause button, come back. But I don't have to keep logging all those hours. And the whole process of just issuing, doing the client invoicing, they take payment. The reporting is great for tax purposes. So that was kind of my go-to invoicing tool when I used to use hourly billing. I love the concept of Waze. I find the user interface quite poor, but I really like what they did with crowdsourcing traffic information and providing with really great route optimization. So I would say there's some really cool technology there, and the overall user experience promise is great, and the execution I would give probably a B- to a C. It's very kind of amateur feeling. It's extremely laborious to look at. A lot of thick, heavy graphic information on there. Whereas if you look at Google Maps, for example, the signal to noise ratio is a lot higher. So it's focused on your route, and they're down. They've used a lot more muted ink on the screen to keep the noise factor down. Like I don't need every road colored in full black. So it's just it's a lot to look at, and it's very invasive. But I really like the concept of that, so I use that all the time.
That's interesting because I believe Google owns Waze now.
Yes. Yeah. So that's how you have the traffic. I think they bought them for the data. They're basically just their nodes now. The Waze phones are probably their nodes to go collect the traffic data,
right.
And then you bring that into Google Maps. I think the algorithms are different because I still think Google Maps algorithm. I think one of them is focused on short distance, and the other one's looking at time. And both of those can be right at different times, so you get sometimes different recommendations.
Right.
But I mean, it's funny you say that, and I tend to, and I think this is like what actually most users think about is the best interfaces are really invisible, and I'm not sitting there thinking about it. I'm just thinking about my overall process of going through some activity. Like if I'm paying my bills or I'm shopping online or whatever, it's like I'm not really at Saks Fifth Avenue or whatever to look at their interface and to filter on stuff. Like I just want to know, do you have black jeans and skinny fit or whatever the heck it is? Like, do you have those in stock? And are they at the store that's closest to me? And what time is the store there? Like, I don't remember what the interface is, but I don't want to be thinking about it. And as soon as I start, like the Waze thing, I noticed it, which is my first hint that something is wrong, is that I'm kind of noticing it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
So you're a classically trained musician. correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm interested to know if being a musician has helped you at all with product design or influenced the way that you approach it.
Both of my different domains that I work in have influenced the other. A lot of my business skill and some of those things that you pick up in the business world definitely help with being a performing artist and a working artist. And vice versa. I think one thing that you get used to really quickly is being on a stage or being a lead, like especially in the percussion world, we deal with a lot of kind of leadership aspects, or being you're dealing with operations, you're dealing with ensemble stuff. So you're used to working in teams a lot in that space. We're also dealing with a lot of operational, like what you call operational stuff. So the logistics of like, you know, being a classical percussionist or really any if you look at, you know, we're at my house and you can see all my stuff here. When you're doing a large show or whatever, there's just a lot of gear that needs to be dealt with and who's bringing what. And so like when I'm 19, 20 years old or whatever, you're learning a lot about being organized and making sure your team has everything, and that the team, you know, again, I call it the team, but in the music, and that the ensemble suffers if so-and-so forgets his whatever. That's a problem. Or like, crap, we don't have any hardware to hold up the whatever, we need 25 pitched Almglocken, but we have nothing to put them on because someone didn't bring it. Well, the whole show now suffers because of that. So you learn to be very organized and kind of like operationally sound, I guess you could say. And then also in specific to design, I think, is that artists have the luxury of focusing on like, this is my art and this is what I have to say with my art and my music. And I don't really care what you think or not, but actually I do care that you have some reaction to it, whether it's you might say I don't like it, which is fine, but you're thinking about the audience a lot of the time. At least I am as an artist, and it doesn't mean I want to do what they want. That's more of an entertainer's job versus an artist, but I am thinking about that response. And so empathy is one of the most important things I think about being a good designer, and it's not unlike what it is to be an artist, to be aware of the other people that you're with. And so I'm always thinking about the other person as much as possible. And I just think that's a good thing to do as a human being anyways, but I'm thinking about my clients and their interests. And I'm talking to an engineer. I'm sitting there thinking about what are the difficulties of the changes that I'm going to ask for. I've written enough code to know that this is, okay, we're talking about new fields to the database now. We're talking about API access to this other thing. I'm going to think about I'm going to relate to him and try to have that empathy there when I have the discussion and say, man, I know this sucks. I know that you do not want to connect this. And I know we said we were absolutely not going to need to connect to the system. But if we could only get the running monthly average total widgets sold per whatever from the data warehouse, we could look at this thing we can do over here. But I know we don't have the data. Is there any way we can get that done? I'm thinking about their perspective, and I guess as an artist, I'm thinking about that too. So that maybe that came from that.
Okay. Awesome. I want to move now into our rapid fire questions. So the first question is, what's a startup in Boston that you're most excited about?
I'm actually going to plug two of my old clients. So I work there. There's two that come to mind. I like what Kyruus, 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 is doing in the healthcare space. So in a way, you could say it really helps the hospitals, but they have software. It's called Provider Match, and basically what it does is when you call and say, hey, I have this really weird rash on my arm, they enable the person in the call center to literally type in arm rash instead of a medical term for that, and to see all the qualified doctors or service providers that meet the customer's needs. I really want to see a woman. And by the way, I don't speak my child only speaks Spanish. And do you have anything on Wednesdays? And we only have Medicaid. That's a very difficult query to run, and most in the traditional hospital, they don't have that kind of data. They kind of like, oh yeah, Dr. Jones I think does that. We'll let you talk to him or whatever. They kind of have these favorites in their head that they develop over time. Mm-hmm. And what this does is it sends a lot of work to a few doctors who are very busy, which becomes a long wait for you to get to go see somebody. And so overall, if you could redistribute the amount of work coming into the hospital across the available service providers, and enable the call center person to say, hey, this person is trained. They went to Harvard. They speak Spanish. They can get you in tomorrow. Are you available at 4? No, I can only go on Wednesdays. Okay, I have 5 people who are all available for the next 4 Wednesdays. That enables the hospital to fill the request earlier, which is good for their business, but the patient is also going to get seen earlier. So I think that's a really nice improvement in patient user experience is just getting filled with and feeling like you're seeing a qualified person, not just feeling, but you actually are. And this person can convince you. So I like what Kyruus is doing there. And another company is called Dispatch. So Dispatch was kind of like an Uberization platform for home services, warranty companies, and that type of thing. So we've all been in that thing where it's like, my refrigerator died and you need to pick from available times, and it's like the times are like way out really far, and then you get an 8-hour or 4-hour window. Basically what they're doing is reducing that amount of time, and they're connecting people in need of small home repairs, jobs, warranty service with technicians a lot quicker. And so they actually sell into the enterprise typically, and then there's a network. The enterprise will have its network of, say, plumbers and electricians all around. So they want their technicians to use the Dispatch mobile app so that they can send jobs directly to the phone only at the times when those guys need work. So that's part of the reason you see these long delays in services, because the the person with the job, like you go onto Angie's List or you go onto some Service Master or something like that, it's very hard. It takes a while for them to find an available technician who wants the work, that can do the work that's in your area. So if they had insight into when guys had, and women had availability in their calendar, then it would be much easier to send qualified leads at a good time when they know people are available for work and get them to respond immediately. And just getting that response time up is really kind of a win for everyone. It's better for the dispatcher and enterprise. It's better for Dispatch, the company, and it's better ultimately for the customer, which is what matters the most. It should be connecting us and letting workers do more work and focus on the kind of work that they want to do. I only want to get electrician jobs, and don't call me on Saturdays, so I'm going to turn Saturday off. So now the business doesn't waste time calling me with jobs on Saturdays anymore, because I don't want to work on Saturdays. Mm-hmm. So Dispatch is kind of enabling, which is great. It's good for the jobs economy, so it's good for the workers, and it's also good for customers that can get faster response time, and obviously you can take payment and rate do all that magic stuff too. So I like what Dispatch is doing as well.
What's something about you that most people don't know?
I played a concert at Montreal Jazz Festival in front of 150,000 people with my big band. And I'll actually, a lot of people, sometimes I talk about my music background with my clients. Usually that comes out later, but a lot of people don't know that I have like a working career, as a musician as well. And I run 2 ensembles, and I have a record label, and they might have seen me at a show. I play at North Shore Music Theater and the Boston Opera House, sometimes when Broadway shows come through town, and clubs and festivals, and I'm playing with Albany Symphony this weekend. So they might have seen me and didn't see me wearing all black and hidden under the stage.
What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
As a designer, or just as a person? Like, I'm asking you that so I can stall and think about your...
Yeah. As a person.
Someone told me, like, people remember how you made them feel, and that, like, really stuck with me as, like, maybe you're arguing about a design decision or whatever, and it changed my perspective just on things about not necessarily winning the argument with facts or whatever it may be when you get in those debate questions, as a designer with teams and stuff like that. But it just reframes your perspective on the thing. Not that I've ever tried to say something mean to someone, but I always kind of think big picture with my relationships. It's so true. We don't why don't I like that person? I don't know. I just don't. But you were like, that one time you did whatever, and you don't even remember the specifics of that. So it's like, I just remember feeling like I don't want to be remembered as the one that made them feel bad. So like, I don't know, I took that forward with me. And always thought, the smartest thing, like when I'm working in business, it's like I have to look smart, or I have to have the right answer all the time at any cost. Otherwise my job's on the line or whatever. And you're so scared of like losing your job, over trivial stuff, like every wrong thing. Oh my God, I was too long at the bathroom, like I remember out of music school, I was just so naive, like, but yeah.
Okay. And that must play a lot into your focus on empathy as well.
Yeah, I guess you could say they're pretty related.
So outside of work, what do you look forward to the most?
Outside of work, well, I love taking time off. I'm between just running the business, my designing business, and having the music career. It's one of the ironies. I was joking. I'm in a Celtic project as well with a couple that leads the group, and they've both been self-employed for 20 years as well. And the big joke is that people think self-employed people have a lot of time off, and the reality is that you probably take less time off because you're not forced to take time off as you are in a business. They might shut the business down at Christmas and you get 4 weeks and, you can't carry them over. Well, that incentivizes you to take the time.
Yeah.
But when you're self-employed, you tend actually to, if you're like me at least, and you're not sitting around waiting for the phone to ring and you're out there, you've got the grit and you're doing your grind. Like, you got to schedule that in, and have the downtime. So I like to fill that with cooking, and so I do love doing barbecues and stuff, and I'm a big fan of the big green egg. So, and I'm also like a big fan of tiki culture. So a lot of my friends and clients know this. I'm into cocktail culture, and specifically like the old Polynesian pop culture. So just having little parties like that, and having fun, playing music is always a good time. Even just practicing, like practicing can be a laborious thing sometimes. Other times it can be actually one of the most rewarding things, is just to have time to go focus on something for 4 hours, and that's actually not, I don't look at that as work anymore. It's actually something I look forward to, because when you're gigging and working, you don't always have time as much to practice, so it's a real pleasure.
Who in the design field do you follow and read?
Right now, I've actually really been focused on the independent consulting world, and there are people helping out individual consultants on different aspects of their business. So I'm actually going to give a prop more for them than the design. So Jonathan Stark is a well-known mobile developer who also does work helping out people on pricing engagements and stuff like that. Philip Morgan from Philip Morgan Consulting, he does a lot of work with independent consultants on positioning. So helping, basically, how do you drive more leads to your consulting business as a developer? And it's positioning is really the ingredient he uses to do that. Brennan Dunn is another kind of thought leader in that space. So I've been actually spending a lot of time reading up on that and different types of sales techniques and those types of things, as opposed to following UI designers. But I'll give props to some of the people I have worked in the past that I learned a lot from, actually. My friend Johan Sonnen runs Involution Studios up in Arlington. So I worked under him at MITRE and did some work for his company as well. So they're focused really on the medical space, product design in the medical space. But he's a fantastic designer. He's a personality, very strong personality, really interesting guy. But I've learned a ton from him about visual design and just the power of design, kind of capital D, in both the business and user experience space, so to speak. So he's like a thumbs up. Jared Spool, I think, gives very good advice to help designers work better, especially employed designers at companies. So I think he gives really nice keynote speeches and at the different types of events and stuff. But he has nice tactical advice. I really like the content he puts out. Yeah, so those are 4 or 5 names.
What are some of your favorite tools that help make your work and life easier?
I'm not a big tool person, so to speak, but in terms of when I get to the point where I'm doing UI work, I will plug Sketch and Envision as tools for UI designers. And the only reason I'm bringing that up, because I don't really care what your tool set is. It's really about the output. So I'm not going to tell you what hammer to use. Like, if you want to use that hammer, fine. But in this case, those tools were the first in probably 20 years, I would say, that actually significantly reduced what we call tool time instead of goal time. So goal time is thought about really doing creative design work, and tool time is like the amount of time it takes for me to get head thinking onto the interface is tool time. And the less time it takes to do that, the more I can focus on creative activity, getting feedback from my clients or from the customer, and iterating. Yeah. And so that's really what Sketch has done, and Envision has really reduced that amount of time. They've made it easier to get the feedback, to collaborate, and to basically just ship product faster. We don't have to spend as much time. Oh, crap, the nav bar changed, and I got to update 52 different screens because the test needs the prototype to be right. Nope, it's one change. So it's that alone right there is hours and hours of tool savings. So, and I know there's some competitors now. I haven't dumped into the Adobe product yet. So there's some other competitors in that space now. But that, I would say, for UI design, that's probably the number 1 and 2.
Okay.
So,
what are some of your favorite blogs or books?
Well, you can see some of it. So Sketching User Experiences is a really good book. That's the yellow one there. I think that's a Bill Buxton book. I like Tufte's books, which are down on the bottom there. So Tufte writes a lot about what he calls, beautiful evidence, for example, but data visualization, information visualization. It's much more from an academic standpoint, so I think it would benefit designers a lot more than it would benefit like business people. But he does do a nice workshop every year. I think about every year in Boston, and you actually get the books for free just attending the workshop. But it will feel like you're back in college. It's like a lecture, and like, put your hands down. There will be questions at the end of the seminar. It's like, it's very kind of like, he's a character. He's quite a person, but he does know the space very well. It's more in a consulting. Alan Weissman, I think, is one of his consulting books. Kind of been reading more about that because, like, currently where I am with my career, I tend to think about, there's always things to learn with design. Design is really like a tool of consulting. Like, consulting for me is very much about improving someone's future state, as opposed to just how many hours at this hourly rate, and when it runs out, then I go away or you re-up me. It's like, no, at the end of this project, I'm going to increase X, Y, and Z. I'm going to decrease this. I want you to feel more confident about your product, and we want to hear positive comments from users and the testing that we're going to do. I'm going to sell you that. And that's I want to sell outcomes. And so design is just the tool that I use to get to those things. And that's my training, is to use that tool. So I'm reading a lot more about like how to be an effective consultant, how to listen to feedback properly, how to get to the needs that people have when they don't necessarily, most of my clients don't come to me with, here's exactly what I need. They come to me with a symptom, and then we have to spend some time getting to what the actual problem is. And so the engagement usually changes quickly, but that's part of the active consulting is getting to that real need. And so I'm kind of tend to read more on that kind of space.
Okay. Just a few final questions here to close out. Mm-hmm. So the first one is, where can people find out more about your company, Designing for Analytics?
Designingforanalytics.com. So yeah, there's if you're interested, there's a free mailing list on there. So if you're interested in general design, but more specifically about data heavy products, analytics products, and just how to apply design thinking there, that's the place to go. There's also a free I have a free self-assessment guide. So it's about a 10-page PDF with kind of high-level axioms, I guess you could call them, for self-analyzing your own product. So maybe you're like, I don't know, this doesn't feel right, but we're not ready to hire somebody. And the idea is that you can kind of use the guide to start asking the right questions against your design and figuring out whether or not, A, we can change them, or B, I don't want to do this myself, or C, hey, I never asked that. That's a good point. We should change this. So I'm hoping people can get, just start doing more design on their own, even if they never call me. I think design can make the world a better place, and the less tooling and less we're talking about data, and the more we're either helping people take insights on the data, or ideally you don't even have to look at anything because we're just changing the world through the information in a smart way. Great. But people need to be thinking about design to do that, to get to that state. So
where can people connect with you online?
So my Twitter handle is actually my old company name, which was Rhythm Spice. So it's RHYTHM Spice. And then Brian at Designing for Analytics, BRIAN.
And last question here. Do you have any parting thoughts, advice, or suggestions for the audience?
I really like, one of the things I love about Boston is like it seems like every night of the week there is a meetup group, or there's an event going on, or there's a social thing. It might just be social, UI designer beer meetup, or there was one drunk user testing. That was a really interesting one I saw come up. But there's a lot of opportunities to just go out and listen to what people are doing, and to watch demo days and stuff like that. So I think that's a fun thing if you're in the startup space. It's just kind of being around like-minded people, and Mobile Mondays and some of those. So yeah, go tap your network, and not just to network, but go see what other people are doing and what their challenges are, and see how you can pick up on their failures and use whatever their experiences were to apply it to your own thing, and not spend time relearning the same the same things.
Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Take care.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. You'll get all my new episodes as soon as they're released right on your podcast app. And if you really liked today's episode, it would mean a lot to me if you could write a review of the podcast as well. Just go to startupbostonpodcast.com/iTunes. And remember, you can find all show notes with links at startupbostonpodcast.com. Until next time, if you have any feedback, ideas for guests, or just want to say hi, you can reach me at nic@startupbostonpodcast.com or reach out on Twitter at startupbosscast. That's startup BOS cast. Cheers.